Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third International Workshop on Process-Oriented Data Science for Healthcare, PODS 2020. So I didn't get crazy. This is a dog. This is a green dog. So in Spain, we said that something is weirder than a green dog. And we must admit, all of us, that this year has been weirder than a green dog. So we came from the last year that we had the workshop in one of the most beautiful university buildings I have ever seen in Austria to basically this. So I don't see that as a bug, more as a feature. So probably this is going to be one of the most attended workshops we will ever have, since it's free and you can do it from your home. So I like to see that as an opportunity. So just to recap the changes of the workshop in the last year. So the PODS Alliance, the Process-Oriented Data Science for Healthcare Alliance, got merged with the Task Force on Process Mining. So we are basically a chapter within the task force that encourage, enforce, organize everything related with process mining in healthcare. Of course, that includes that the workshop has been changed from BPM to the ICPM conference series. This is our first edition in the second ICPM conference. Just some numbers of the workshop. We had 4 submissions, a bit less than previous years, but it's easy to understand given the situation. We accepted 7 regular papers. We accepted 2 forum papers, shorter papers. We had 42 reviews. We had 37 program committee members, 6 organizers, and of course, one and only workshop, PODS for Healthcare 2020. So just to recap, the workshop is going to be organized in 3 research sessions. So the first one chaired by Emmanuel M., the second one by Niels Martin, and the third one by Marcos Sepúlveda. And finally, at the end, we are going to have a closing. In this closing, we will have a PODS for Healthcare Alliance panel where we are going to present several initiatives, etc. Do I hear awards? Yes, awards. Special issue? Maybe. A book? Who knows? PODS membership? We will see. You have to wait until the closing to know maybe some of these things. So let's start PODS for Healthcare 2020. Emmanuel, whenever you have.
Thank you, Jorge. So we will start with the first session. The first session has 3 contributions, and I would like to have Erika Tavazzi present the first contribution called a process mining approach to statistical analysis application to a real-world advanced melanoma dataset. Please, Erika, share your screen.
Yes, so hi everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for the introduction. And today I'm going to present you the work I performed during my PhD. In particular, I collaborated with the Precision Oncology Center of the Lausanne University Hospital in a period I was there. The goal of this work was to check and to try to implement the classical steps of a statistical analysis by employing a full process-oriented approach. So we designed a 3-step statistical analysis going from data preprocessing to descriptive and inferential statistics. A little bit more in detail, in data preprocessing, we were interested to shape the data from raw data to event log structure in order to analyze with process-oriented techniques our data. So we selected the variables and the events of interest, and we also handled some issue required for data cleaning. In the descriptive statistic, we investigated both single events and patterns defining the patient's path of care in terms of numerosity, order, and also timing. And finally, in the inferential statistics steps, we were focused on some specific cohorts predefined or that emerged from the models that we obtain on the data in order to assess the survival differences and also assess the possible effect of some covariates on the outcomes. As a case study, since I was collaborating with the Oncology Center, we focused on a cohort of patients diagnosed with advanced melanoma. Very briefly, melanoma is an aggressive cancer arising from melanocytes. There are different kinds of melanoma. Maybe the most frequent one is the cutaneous melanoma. And the extent of this disease is described by a staging system. And in particular, we focused on patients affected by first stage melanoma. That is when the melanoma spreads to other organs. So the most serious phase, let's say. Data were sourced from the electronic health records of the university hospital. And for all the analysis, I was supported and assisted by trained oncologists. We were asked to focus our research on the systemic treatments administered after stage 4 diagnosis. And so, as you will see in our analysis, a special focus is on this. We employed different means of process mining and of process mining for healthcare. In particular, we used some tools that allows to discover processes, so to mine the data to represent the process able to produce them. And also some techniques belonging to conformance checking that is classically used to measure to which extent a process can represent an event log or how much an event log complies with a given process. For all our analysis, we used an R package that is PMiner. This is a software that implements several algorithms of process mining and is explicitly designed for coping with data in the medicine and healthcare domain. So also some formalisms are adapted for healthcare. As process discovery algorithm, we selected the first order Markov models, the FOMs, that are the PMiner implementation of the directly for log graphs. For each event of the event log, a node of a graph is built, and then a directed edge is links the nodes that represent subsequent activities in the event log. This algorithm can be thresholded, for instance, on the minimum number of occurrences in the event log. We decided not to threshold anything in this algorithm implementation in order to see our data with the highest resolution. As an advantage, this is, well, of course, an unsupervised technique, so you don't need to integrate any a priori knowledge. It's very intuitive, also easy to explain to clinicians, and it's very helpful to share a first idea of where the information is in the data, so to give a first representation. As a limit, since it's a first order Markov model, it's limited to subsequent activities. So if you want to inspect something more distant in time, you have to use other algorithms. As conformance checking techniques, we used another formalism that is present in PMiner, that is the pseudo workflow. It allows to design a diagram representing the expected process, so the expected flow of events, by defining a set of nodes that are the status that the subjects can assume, and a set of conditions that are rules that code transition between status. Then, after designing an empty process, you can run down the event log to capture the population behavior through the diagram, and so to assess where the population is going with respect to the expected behavior. This tool is very useful, this algorithm, since it can support the simultaneous representation of different levels of abstraction. Indeed, you can define triggers that activates more than one status at the same time. And so you can allow, by using only one graph, different processes of interest at the same time. As a limit, well, since it's a supervised technique, it requires to integrate some domain knowledge, and so it requires the assistance of clinicians. But it's also a point of richness. So as a first step, we implemented data preprocessing. So we cast the data in form of event log. In particular, since we were interested in treatments after 4th stage diagnosis, we selected as primary events the diagnosis of the primary tumor, then the diagnosis of 4th stage. Then for each treatment, we define 2 events that are the treatment begin and the treatment end. And of course, one patient can have multiple lines of treatment after the stage 4 diagnosis. And finally, the survival event that is censored if the patient was lost at follow-up or the treatments were still ongoing when we froze the data, or death if the patient was dead, of course. We also paired some attributes to some events, like, for instance, the type of melanoma, the stage of primary tumor, the somatic mutation on the tumor, and of course, the specific type or category of treatment administered to the patient. These attributes are very useful to stratify the patient and also to filtering the patient in the next algorithms. Then we employed a first order Markov model implementation to clean our data, in particular, starting from the event log that was supposed to work on clean data. We inspected the mined foam on this data, in particular by studying which edges emerged but were unexpected. So for instance here, since by design and for the nature of the data, we only consider treatments after diagnosis of 4th stage, there should not have been this edge from treatment begin to stage 4. And another hint was that the frequency occurrence, the transition probability from T begin to stage 4 was very, very low. And so probably some patient or maybe one patient had something different from the other. Different doesn't mean wrong, but in this case, unexpected was suspect. So we talked with our clinicians that rechecked and updated the data set. So we corrected the event log, and this procedure was repeated until we obtain an event log total form representation totally compliant with what we expected. Then, as a second step, we implemented descriptive statistics. Well, first of all, we exploited the order structure of the data in the form of event log. This is already a rich tool because by simply querying the event log, you can inspect the cardinality, the timing, and the order of the single events. For instance, we focused on the single drug categories without respect of where they were in the lines of the patients. And so you can count them in terms of occurrence or duration overall the population. And also by looking at the event log of each single patient, you can start characterizing the patterns of care of the patient. Then, as a second step, we again used the first order Markov models that we discovered on the data. This allows to inspect the temporal causality of the events, also to start to highlight the most frequent connection overall the population. I remind once again the limits, of course, of this algorithm that is by considering only one step relationship, but it can already give a first overview of the position of the events in the paths. And the tool that we employed also allows to filter on the attributes and on the events, so you can zoom in and zoom out, obtaining different first order Markov models. Finally, as a third step for our descriptive statistics, we implemented and analyzed a pseudo workflow. We designed the structure as you can maybe see in my small screen. So by following the chronological order of the events and trying to depict which was the expected path of care of all the patients. So there was a primary diagnosis, then a stage 4, and then a first line of treatment that ends, a second line of treatment, each one with all the different possible categories and macro categories of drugs. Then, after designing an empty pseudo workflow, you can run down the event log in order to follow the population through the path that you predetermined and inspect exactly the number of times that a status was reached or a trigger was fired at a single patient or a population level. I reported here that, as I anticipated, it's possible to implement different levels of abstraction for the data. In fact, for instance, we reported a node for immunotherapies and also some other nodes for the specific drugs of immunotherapies, so that you can query the event log by focusing on macro categories or specific treatments. Finally, for the inferential statistic, we were interested in inspecting the timing occurring from one event to the other, or from one defined status to the other, for specific subcohorts. So this can be done in two different ways with respect to what you want to inspect. We first used the process discovered with the first order Markov model. This process can be queried, of course, by limiting to the single events reported in the event log, since the first order Markov model reflects the information presenting the event log as it is. So you can select the cohort by querying on all the events. You can also filter on the attributes. For instance, here we were interested in studying the time occurring from the primary stage diagnosis to stage 4 diagnosis only for the cutaneous melanoma patients. And so this was a first filtering. And then we further stratified by inspecting the possible effect of different somatic mutation and the possible effect of the severity of primary stage. So it's really easy to enrich the level of detail of the analysis by only querying or subquerying on specific attributes or on specific events. We also employed the conformance checking tool we implemented. In this case, queries are not based on the events present in the event log, but on the status defined by the user. So it's a different level of abstraction of the information and a different access to the information itself. In this case, we were interested, for example, to inspect the differences in terms of overall survival from stage 4. And so we defined different paths that we expected to define our subcohorts of patients. So patients that during their lines only had immunotherapies, or immunotherapies followed by TKI, or TKI and then immunotherapies and only TKI. We extracted the subcohorts and investigated the overall survival in terms of Kaplan-Meier curves and log rank test. So to conclude, we demonstrated that a process-oriented approach can be used to implement, to fully implement the 3 classical steps of data analysis: preprocessing, descriptive statistics, and inferential statistics. What are the lessons that we learned? Well, first of all, the temporal nature of the data that is characterizing of the data when we are inspecting the clinical pathway of a patient is easily handled thanks to the structuring of the information in the form of event log, and also to the plenty of techniques that a process-oriented approach provides. Among these techniques, process discovery techniques allows to query, mine the data in an agnostic way. And on the other hand, conformance checking allows to implement predefined workflows and then study data at different levels of abstraction. One of the strength points of process mining, and the process mining for healthcare in this case, is the effectiveness of the process representation that can help both in visualizing information, but also in testing and sometimes suggesting hypotheses for the research. Then this structure can be easily queried by using formalisms and languages available in different tools. And I really like to highlight how such technique can effectively promote dialogue inside the working team, and also helping in disseminating the results, since visual representation are always very effective. And yes, last but not least, I'd like to say thank you to my team in Lausanne, since only, well, in healthcare in general, but also here, only working together with a multidisciplinary and proactive team, you can reach great results. So thank you for your attention. If you have any question, of course, I'm here.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think there will be questions, and we have about 5 minutes for them. So please raise your hands and I can ask you to unmute. So first, Marcos, please. Okay, Marcos, would you like to ask a question?
No, I was not raising my hand, Emmanuel.
Ah, okay. It looked like you were raising your hand. Anyone? Questions? Otherwise, of course, I have some questions. Okay. So I'm interested in the kind of mistakes you found in the data. So the data quality issues that you identified. Exactly.
Yes.
Did you investigate where those came from?
Yes, most times there were some inversions in the dates because sometimes of human errors, data were mined from electronic health records, but sometimes they were written by clinicians, or and other times it was a matter of how data were coded. So comma instead of point in the date,
Okay.
and so on.
So would you say that these kind of data quality issues could be cleaned in some kind of automatic way, or is it something that you need domain experts for to identify?
Well, I wish there was an automatic way, since data preprocessing is always a very time-consuming part of the analysis. Well, for detecting the issue is something that most of the time can be done from a data scientist who does not know a lot about the specific domain, but then correction, checking and correction almost every time it requires clinicians.
Mm-hmm. So you need clinicians all the way through your project, as you highlighted?
Yeah, exactly. Since from the first stages, when you have plenty of data, sometimes in electronic health records, and you have a research question, okay, but which kind of data do I have to use? Which kind of data do I have to select? So since from the phase on selecting the events and selecting the covariates, I needed my clinicians.
Okay, and also for interpreting the results, of course.
Yeah.
So as you might know, I also did a study on the melanoma surveillance programs, and I would be curious, how long did it take you to get it through the ethics board to use those data?
Well, when I entered in the project, the ethic issues were already fine. So I'm sorry, I can't answer to this question.
Well, that's perfect, just perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Marcos, Jorge, you raised your hands. At least it looks like. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That's clapping.
Coupling.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's go to our next session. Not the next session, but the next paper, of course. Process mining of disease trajectories in MIMIC3, a case study presented by Guntur.
Yep.
Would you please, hi, would you please share your screen?
Okay, thank you for the introduction.
Gunther let us know that it is possible that the connection is not very good, and he provided us with a presentation in case with a pre-recorded video in case that he is cut off. But we will try to have a live presentation and live questions, of course. So let's hope the best, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know that right now it's raining, so I'm a bit worried about it as well. So, okay, let's see what I can do right now. All right. Well, thank you very much. So, hello everyone. My name is Guntur Kusuma. I am a PhD student in the School of Computing, University of Leeds. So today I'm going to show you the study of mining disease trajectories using electronic health records, which has gaining more attention recently, and we believe that process mining can help in discovering this disease trajectory. And today I'm going to show you how we discovered disease trajectory using electronic health record and build the model using the standard process mining approach with help of some transformations and statistical analysis. And in the beginning of this study, we understand that there were some people who already work in this area. They were trying to identify and build models of disease trajectory, and we found out that there were not many. And on the other side, we believe that process mining has the opportunity and capability to do this disease trajectory, and we believe that process mining can make disease trajectory modeling faster and simpler. And this is the general method that we follow. We follow the process mining project methodology, and we've conducted the stage 1 until stage 5, and since we haven't touched the stage 6 yet. And we use this framework because we can work with the experts. In this term, we work with clinicians and epidemiologists. And then we're trying to see how the disease occur in someone's life course. So let's say we have patients, and during their life, diseases may occur at any time, at some point, and then this information are available within an electronic health records. So it's kind of like a rich collection of data in this EHR. And then we also found that there was one group who done this disease trajectory and has been published in Nature. And this is one of the example of their disease trajectory model. And also they define disease trajectory as an ordered series of diagnoses, where the diagnoses were observed in the patient in a specific order. And generally, disease trajectory is the sequence of firstly occurred diseases over time. Therefore, in the disease trajectory model, we're looking for something that is cyclic and contain first ever occurrence of each disease. And then we're trying to look at how the disease trajectory seen as a process mining problem. Looking at the data and looking at the properties of disease trajectory, we have patient ID, we have the diagnostic code, and we have the time when the disease occurred. And we thought that, okay, these properties fulfill the event log for the process mining. So we use the case ID, we use the subject ID as the case ID, and then the diagnostic code as the activity name, and also the time when the disease occurred as the timestamp. And in this study, we use Mimic3 database, which is publicly available, and regarding the quality assessment, it has been done by our group as well, and also has been published. After we implement some selection criteria, we finally worked with 11,700 diagnostic codes from nearly 5,000 patients. And this is what we did. From the extracted event log from the MIMIC database, first, we removed the recurring diagnostic codes, and we kept the first occurrence. In this example, we have D1, D2, D2, D3, D4, and then again D3. So we remove the second, third, and so on. So we only keep the first occurrence. So we have D1, D2, D3, and D4. And after this, we remove all the patient who ends up with only have one diagnostic code, because we will not able to see how the disease progress if they only have one diagnosis code. And then from here, we did the transformation. We transformed the event log into a pair log. So we have a collection of pairs of diagnosis. In the example, for patient for subject ID 21, he suffered a diagnostic code of 410 and 038. And then we put those sequence into antecedent and subsequent into a single row. And also we put the time that follows. After we have the pairs, we did the measurement to the strength of association between pairs. We use relative risk, and then we see the score of relative risk for each pairs. Only those who have relative risk score more than 1 were selected. And after that, we test for the directionality between pairs. So we use the one-tailed binomial test with significant level of 0.05. So until this step, we have a collection of pairs, which is strong in the association and also contains directions. And from here, we transform the pair log back into the event log. And then we add more attributes like sex, the age or age group, and etc. for the next step of the analysis. And regarding of the talking about result, and this is the process model that we discovered using the interactive data aware heuristic miner. We use 776 traces or 81 trace variants, and we also done the conformance checking. And this model was built using all the data that we have, but we don't know if it complies with other event log. So we did the 5-fold cross validations, and we also look at the average score of each quality measurement, and we can see that the score is quite close to the conformance check when we use everything in the data. And then the second result is we saw that there are 3 most common and least common trace variants. And in this example, in the second row, there are some patients that suffer, that have the trajectory of 410 followed by 428, which is acute myocardial infarction or heart attack followed by heart failure. And this trajectory has the median of 3.9 months. The death rate is nearly 72%. And this trajectory mostly happened in male group. More than 50% suffered with this trajectory. And what can we say from here? So in here we can say that we were able to reproduce trajectories like the previous work by Jensen, and our disease trajectories are observed sequence rather than overlapping pairs of disease without knowing if those trajectories are actually available in the data. And then the third result is we see the differences of trajectories among patients group. And we can see that there are differences between male and female, and also differences based on age groups. And it is important to know that we did not deliberately stratify the data of a specific group. And also we see that using a set of process mining tools, we were able to easily look at the differences of trajectories based on the patient's attributes. And for the next result, the third one, we also managed to see the longest and the shortest average time interval trajectories. As for the three longest average time interval, they were all started with chronic ischemic heart disease, and these diseases had progressed into 3 different diseases. And we also provided with the mean and the median of interval. And we can say that this interval information is crucial to the clinicians when they have to make a plan or to deliver care to their patients. And using the process mining approach, it opens up opportunities to cross-reference with other similar type of data, since there are lots of process mining tools that are available widely. And to summarize this work, so in this work, we have presented that we were able to mine disease trajectory using process mining approach, and we used the MIMIC3 dataset, where to the best of our knowledge, this work is the first time to conduct process mining of disease trajectory using a real electronic health records. And also we follow PM² framework as a guideline, because it allow us to work with clinicians as well. As the future works, we are planning to implement this method using population size EHR data, and we also need to improve the measurement of correlation between pairs by implementing null hypothesis significance testing. And we are also planning to assess the sensitivity of the method to the choice of process discovery algorithm. Well, I think that's the end of my presentation. Feel free to ask questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think there will be many questions. So please, if you have any questions, raise your hands. Otherwise, of course, I have many questions. Okay. Then my first question would be, did you do any kind of validation of your results with domain experts, so physicians or medical doctors?
Yes, so in our team, we have clinicians and also epidemiologists. So all the result has been consulted by to the clinician, and they also help us with validating the result, including looking for any publications that support our result as well. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question. Could you point out the difference between process mining and disease trajectories, please? So, yeah.
Yeah. So to point out the difference of disease trajectory and process mining, well, it's a different perspective. So, well, process mining is mostly being used to identify activities or process in organization or business processes, while in this work, disease trajectories, we work with the diagnostic codes or with diseases which has been stored in the electronic health records. So that's the difference. And the similar thing is they both have the similar properties, so we can still use or implement process mining approach into this study. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions? So I would have another one. You state that the disease trajectory is typically acyclic.
Acyclic, yes.
But one of the benefits of process mining is that you could, of course, also model recurrent diseases.
Yeah.
In your example, you also have chronic bronchitis, which is a typical recurrent disease. It goes up and down all the time. So you only have the first appearance, so the first time this chronic bronchitis is diagnosed. But it would also be interesting to analyze, well, all the other diagnoses, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so beside of this work, I've also worked with some other data with different cases. So I've been work with data of patients who suffered with acute myocardial infarction or heart attack. And since the first heart attack, mostly they will suffer the second, the third, and the fourth, and so on. So yes, we can analyze those recurrent diagnoses as well. But in this term, we are looking at how the disease progress one way, which is acyclic. So when we see the doctor, when we have a consultation with doctor, and then the doctor will say, so what kind of disease have you suffered so far? So maybe we can tell that I've been diagnosed with this, I've been diagnosed with this and this. So at least we can give the clinician some a picture of our condition, so it helps them to help us.
Thank you very much. So if there aren't any other questions, we can proceed to our last contribution in this session. Thank you. So our last speaker today in the first session will talk about the need for interactive data-driven process simulation in healthcare, a case study. I welcome Gerhard van Hulsen. Would you please share your screen?
Yeah, I will share my screen. Okay. So you should be able to see my presentation, right? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I will present the work of Niels Martin, Benoît de Paire, and myself, entitled The Need for Interactive Data-Driven Process Simulation in Healthcare, a Case Study. But first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Gerhard van Hulsen. I'm a PhD student at Hasselt University in the research group of Business Informatics. And my research focuses on data-driven capacity management in healthcare using process simulation. So in this case study, we illustrated the impact of data quality issues in the context of data-driven process simulation. And the case study describes a project that we are currently working on. So the hospital management of a Belgium hospital is preparing plans to build new facilities. And so they've asked all the departments to indicate what they will need in those new facilities. And our case study focuses on the radiology department. So the radiology department has to decide how many examination rooms they will need, and also how big the waiting room should be for each of those examination rooms. That means the amount of seats in each of those rooms. And radiology management wants to answer this objectively using data. So we conducted a study, data-driven business process simulation for a capacity management problem. But what is business process simulation? So suppose that we have a process, and that could be a business process, or in our case, it could be a radiology process, so the scanning of patients in the radiology department. And the execution of these processes generates interesting information, which is captured in information systems. And in our case, this was the radiology information system. And we can then use, or we can then extract that information from those information systems in the form of event logs, which then form the basis for our simulation model. And we can then simulate that model using, for instance, discrete event simulation, the technique we used. And the results of that simulation model can be used for various purposes, including capacity management decisions. And capacity management deals with optimizing the use of resources and determining suitable resource levels. And with resources, we mean staff sizes, facilities, and equipment. And in our study, we focus on equipment, namely scanning devices. So while working with the data, we actually noticed a lot of quality issues. And I think the biggest issues that we encountered was with the actual scanning activity itself. So from the moment the patient was put on the scanning table, and then the nurse hit the button start scan until the moment that he or she hit the button stop scan. And one of the issues that we've encountered was incorrect order of timestamps. So meaning that the finish timestamp was recorded before the start timestamp, so that you get a negative activity duration. And also extreme outliers. So some scannings took over several days, weeks, and some even a couple of years. So that didn't make any sense. So to illustrate the impact of those quality issues on the simulation results, we designed an experiment by altering the scanning activity duration. And we considered two scenarios. In the first scenario, we used direct sampling. So we used the observations directly. And in the second scenario, we used distribution fitting. So we fitted a normal distribution or gamma distribution, for instance, to the data. And for each scenario, we considered three alternatives. So the first alternative was the validated filtering data. So we asked the radiology management to validate what is a reasonable time that these scannings could take. No filtering, so we just used the raw data directly. And context agnostic filtering. So we used, so in the case that we don't have any domain knowledge, we used the commonly used boxplot rule to derive cutoff points. And to measure the effects of those alternatives, we used throughput times and waiting times. So we noticed large differences between the validated filtering and no filtering alternatives. So the throughput time and waiting times were systematically longer in the no filtering alternative, up to 100 times longer throughput times and up to 150 times longer waiting times. And we also noticed severe queue accumulation. So therefore we had to weekly reset the process to flush the patient, as we called it. And we also kept track of these counts as well. The differences between the validated filtering and the context agnostic filtering, they were much smaller. However, they are still highly relevant. So especially in the context agnostic filtering, we found that there are much more outliers, so that the averages were also higher than in the validated filtering alternative. Therefore, we conclude that it is imperative to consider data quality issues. So, as I've just mentioned, neglecting those data quality issues can have a profound impact on the reliability of the simulation results. And during the case study, we had difficulties in identifying these quality issues because we are not experts, so we didn't know how many minutes is going to be, how many minutes of scanning is an outlier or is just normal but exceptional behavior, for instance. And the current literature on data-driven process simulation acknowledges this need for expert knowledge, but they do not provide a framework to conceptualize how we can incorporate this domain knowledge during the development of a data-driven simulation model. And therefore, we propose a novel framework which involves 3 cycles to enhance the integration of domain knowledge during model construction. So the first cycle is the initial model construction. So there we build the actual model. Then the second cycle, we calibrate the model. So we optimize it with respect to the reality. And in the third cycle, we have the domain expert validate the entire simulation model. So let me go through this framework in more detail. So we have our hospital information systems or our radiology information systems or any information system which holds this data. We extract event logs from there. And then for each modeling task we need, this could be, for instance, the control flow, so the process that patients follow. It could be the activity durations. It could be decision logic we have to make during the process. For each of these tasks, we first identify the data requirements. And if these requirements are fulfilled, we can proceed to the next step. So, for instance, if we want to include resources, which is imperative for capacity management decisions, we also need some attribute in our event log, which is related to those resources. The next step, we assess the data quality and we feed the data to a discovery algorithm, which is going to use the data and then discover that particular modeling detail. Then we provide the data quality assessment and the discovery algorithm output to the domain expert, which can then approve whether he or she thinks that it is sufficient enough to build a simulation model on, or he or she can alter the discovery parameters to enhance the credibility of that step. And we repeat this for each of those modeling tasks. Then the second cycle, we integrate all these individual modeling tasks into a single simulation model. And then we run it for a first time. And then the preliminary simulation results are also presented to this domain expert, who can then start calibrating the model. So he can start tweaking the simulation parameters until he or she is satisfied with the credibility of the model. And we would like this in real time. So when an expert alters a certain parameter, he or she should get an immediate result on what is the impact of that change. Because if he or she has to wait until we simulated the entire model again, that could take quite some time. And then the third cycle, we run the entire simulation model again and again. So and then we validate the simulation model using, for instance, a validation data set. And once the entire simulation model is completely validated and ready to use, we can then further analyze and do some scenario analysis on it. And then we can, for instance, use it for capacity management decisions. So in this case study, we illustrate the impact of data quality issues on the reliability of data-driven simulation results. And we also present a novel conceptual framework which interactively involves the domain expert during the construction of these data-driven simulation models using the 3 cycles I just mentioned. So an initial model development, then a model calibration, and finally the entire model is validated. For future work, we are planning to go into more detail on how this interaction between the expert and our framework is going to proceed exactly. And ultimately, our goal is also to implement this framework into a tool which will support this interaction. And in addition, we also identified the need for further research on identifying and remedying data quality issues in a healthcare context. Thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So, again, please, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand in the reactions section at the bottom level of your monitor. Otherwise, of course, I have prepared some questions. So let's see.
So, Emmanuel, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, it's Owen here. Thank you, Gerard. That was really good, and well done, Niels. That's a really nice piece of work. So it's really good to involve the domain expert within the development of the model. I wondered to what extent you'd involve the organization and the domain experts in reflecting on the entire process. To what extent is the simulation useful to them in terms of thinking about capacity for the future, which is kind of the macro level involvement of domain experts?
Could you please repeat your question, because I didn't really understood your question.
So I wonder if the end results of your work, have you shown those to your domain experts?
Not yet. We are still working on this case study. Normally, we would have been in a further stage, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we have had some delays in our project.
Of course, yeah, that's good. Can I ask a second? Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah, please, carry on.
Yeah, but ultimately, our goal with this study is that we can give them some recommendation on how many examination rooms they will need in the new facilities, and also how much waiting room capacity they will need. That is our ultimate goal with this case study in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the challenge is always being able to validate the end product, either with domain experts or with data. So the other option would be validating your end product against live data. So for example, running the simulation for 6 months and then seeing whether it can predict the next month. Have you tried that as a? Have you?
That's interesting. That's an interesting way. We can also try indeed. Currently, we are actually we have further expanded our simulation model with some new data we've gathered from the hospital management. And currently we are in the stage that we want to go back to them and ask them for additional input. We also considered using, for instance, a validation data set. So, so we have 2 years of data from the hospital, and then we just say, okay, give us another 2 or 3 months after those 2 years, for instance. However, we are afraid that the same data quality issues are also present in that data set as well. So therefore, it would be really difficult to completely validate it with respect to the reality, because the data we have in the log itself is also not correctly representing the reality.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, that's very interesting. So, so the challenge that you started with and that you'll end with is data quality.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another question from Renata. Please.
Hi. Can you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question is, you said that the domain expert can repair or enhance the model for simulation. Do you intend to limit the changes that the domain expert can do, or the domain expert is free to do whatever change they can? And I'm asking this because I imagine that the domain expert can change the model in such a way that it doesn't represent any of the data anymore. So how do you think that you can deal with this?
Yes, indeed. That's a very interesting point. So yeah, if we give full power to our domain expert to change the model in such a way that he or she thinks that the actual process is, that doesn't necessarily have to be the reality. So indeed, you have a good point there. What I think what we can do is, so we already used the original data. So provided, of course, that there are no severe data quality issues in that data, and that is going to be a major challenge, I think. But if that data already reflects the actual process quite well, then we can say with, well, great certainty to the domain expert that well, he can of course change, he can alter the various parameters, but if we are quite certain that the data already gives a good representation, then we can say to the domain expert that that the data is objectively showing us that maybe his point might be a little bit biased on the process, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I get. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe a very brief follow-up from my side, because that's indeed a very important point, I think. But what is for me key is to make explicit for the domain expert, if he or she proposes some changes, what the effect will be on the simulation. It's also what Gerard hinted to during the presentation. Okay, you as a user, as an expert, can make changes to the model, but it will immediately become apparent, okay, if you change this and this parameter, this would be the effect in the end on your simulation. And then, of course, it's a bit of a trade-off of informing the user, but also empowering the user, because data can be, due to data quality issues, not a very accurate representation of reality. So it's, in the framework, is mainly about informing the experts that we want to make sure that they are aware of what the impact would be of their changes on the output of the model.
Thank you very much. So one last question from Marcos. Should I read it, or would you like to phrase it?
You can read whether. Gerard, thank you for your presentation. My question is, in which cycle do you expect to find more problems in this framework you propose?
That's an excellent question. I think each of these 3 cycles have their own challenges. But I think that the most challenging part is going to be, well, yeah, so either the initial model construction. So really having all the algorithms we need to completely construct a simulation model and then combine everything together. I think that is going to be a really difficult challenge. And also, how are we going to present this data to the domain expert? How are we going to present data quality issues to the domain expert? And I think another challenging part is the calibration part, when the domain expert can start changing various simulation model parameters. We want them to give them an indication in sort of real time of what the impact is of that change. And I also think that that might be quite challenging to get that feature in our whole framework.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks to all three speakers for their time slot discipline. We are finished in time, and well, 5 minutes, but that's okay. I'm looking forward to the next session, and we will see each other in about 25 minutes. So see you later. Thank you very much.